an expert in surveillance and electronic harassment. And the first question I have, is it your observation that there is a wider scale of surveillance of average people, people with no threat to the national security, in your estimation?
I would say that most of those targeted are not and never have been a threat. I think that what happened initially when these operations began, probably 30 years ago, people were singled out perhaps because of some affiliation, either direct or indirect, with the United States government, and invited attention. But they were not singled out as being threats. They were singled out as being lucrative targets of experimentation. In the past 15 years, since shutting down the electronic surveillance project, primarily to seek employment, which I did seek and did obtain, I had occasion to observe many, many, many instances of individuals in the corporate environment being singled out and targeted simply because they were convenient targets of opportunity. And I have to comment on something I heard you say early on. You referred to the difficulty of establishing causation in order to pursue these claims.
And I might add, that was made in a legal sense based on the fact that we were naive people, not really understand. I'd be honest with you, I had not understood the problem back then and felt it would be a difficult problem just based on the fact of knowing how the crime is committed, how to pin that crime on someone. Go ahead.
I understand the legal implications, certainly. There is enough literature on the Internet and elsewhere that establishes the existence of these weapon systems. To pinpoint, for purposes of prosecution, to pinpoint their existence would be difficult. And the position I take is that rather than pinpoint them for prosecution purposes, it's easy enough to single them out by electronic means and to destroy them. But I guess that's taking the matter a little far afield. I think, frankly, we still face, until Congress establishes laws that forbid the use of these technologies for involuntary experimental purposes, that we're going to get absolutely nowhere in attempting to prosecute.
A voice, I mean a strong voice for warning people of these systems for at least the past 10 years regarding the installation of specialized electronic equipment on utilities. What are these electronics and what are their capabilities?
Their capabilities generally are to inflict pain in highly focused fashion and to alter mental states. Certainly when you have a frequency aimed at your brain, your mental functions tend to alter. In amplified form, they're sufficient, the frequencies have the capacity to kill. So that's one reason why the Department of Defense refers to them as less than lethal rather than non-lethal weapons. As a matter of fact, the Department of Defense has gone so far as to eliminate them, to remove them from the category of even less than lethal weapons and to bury them under the category of electronic weapons, trying to make them a little bit blacker.
Now, is this protocol of surveillance and harassment seemingly patterned after a government protocol now applied to the general civilian population? It's
difficult to pinpoint everything at this stage on the U.S. government exclusively because these are global operations.
Okay.
The pattern, the protocols are virtually identical on a global scale. So someone is overseeing the entire activity. The government obviously is complicit because otherwise these operations would not be allowed to exist. Why? It's hard to say. Whether it's for testing electronic weapon systems for future use under combat conditions, or whether ultimately there's a holocaust in the offing, it's hard to say. The term TI is common, referring to targeted individuals.
Okay.
Those are people who fully realize that they are on the receiving end of electronic weapons systems. But even amongst TIs, there is the perception in certain areas that our government would not do this. It's a case of not recognizing reality. First of all, if this were not being done by our government, Congress would step in because of the hundreds of complaints they have received, thousands of complaints, no doubt, over the past 10, 15 years from citizens who recognize what's going on. Congress, back in the early 90s, late 80s, took the position that anyone complaining about these systems were imagining things because they simply didn't exist. Within 2 years, by 1992, they were off the drawing boards and, in fact, being fielded and conveyed to law enforcement agencies. Congress recognizes that these weapons systems exist and funds them and knows, as a result of appropriate briefings, what the bioeffects can be, yet they have passed no legislation prohibiting their use under unconstrained experimental circumstances. That's number one. Number two, given that these systems draw on existing power grids, it would be necessary for the FCC as a minimum and the Department of Energy as a minimum to have some oversight and control over what is going on. So obviously, with Congress, the FDA, and the Department of Energy, the FCC and the Department of Energy are knowledgeable and yet unwilling to do anything about it. So there is complicity, but the question is, at whose bidding is the U.S. government allowing these operations to take place?
Now, from your experience, how intense is this surveillance of targeted individuals? And tell us about the ways that this is accomplished.
From what I have observed, first of all, I should explain that the standard, as I addressed this in microwave harassment and mind control experimentation, there was a pattern that was unfolding when I was dealing with other targeted individuals who had contacted me. There was a pattern of harassment which indicated that there had been some surveillance going on, some monitoring of their private lives. There had been entry into their houses. There was systematic harassment, and then ultimately, as part of a softening up process, and then ultimately electronic harassment would follow, which would include the inducement of auditory input, which is now being referred to as V2K. In answer to your question, I'm not certain if I think I'm probably missing the point there, but in order to target someone, it requires that that person be put under surveillance, so that their personality traits, their capacity to interrelate with people, their capacity for corruption or non-corruption, that seems to be a critical point, and even their religion factors into it. Following a period of harassment, they are singled out for preliminary stages of harassment, which would include gang stalking, entry of their private homes and apartments, followed by gradually intensified and ultimately extremely intensified electronic harassment. This is a pattern that has unfolded over and over and over.
And so, when you, I guess what I'm getting at, and that's a very good answer. You're seeing a pattern amongst these individuals. I guess.
Global.
Yeah. Is there any pattern about